In our last lecture, we have discussed triple DES. Now, as I mentioned before, in case of DES, we use only 64-bit key. But in reality, our messages are much more longer than 64 bits. So if the messages are long, in that case, how we can handle it? For that, several operation modes are proposed. One of the simplest mode is electronic codebook mode, or in short, we call it ECB mode. In case of electronic codebook mode, let's take a look how actually we can utilize this kind of modes. Let's say we have a message. This is our message. It's a long message. We can divide our message into several blocks where each of the blocks are of 64 bits. Let's say this one is 64 bit. This one is again 64 bit. This way we can have many 64 bits block. Now we take the first block of plain text, let's call it P1, and then we perform the encryption operation with a key. Here we can use any block cipher technique. The example I am giving here is for DES because DES is 64 bit, but in case of AES they use 128 bit. So if you would like to apply this one for AES, your block size should be 128 bits. So block size depends on the algorithm that you are applying. So if we perform the encryption operation, we'll get the ciphertext. This one we can express it this way. Ciphertext block I can be received if we pass the plain text Pi and the key K. It will produce the ciphertext. The second one, after the first one is done, we'll consider the second block, and the second block will be encrypted, which will produce ciphertext block 2. Similarly, the last block is our Pn, which will be encrypted, and it will create ciphertext block Cn. If we combine all of them, then we'll get C, which the number of bits in C should be equivalent to the number of bits in the message or plain text. This is how electronic code books work. Before discussing the limitations of electronic code block, let's discuss some advantages of electronic code. One important advantage is that it is pretty simple in terms of implementation. What you have to do, you just have to divide your message into blocks and process block by block. The second one, this one supports parallel processing. Means that, let's say, if you would like to run different blocks of plain text into different processors, we can do that. Into different kernels, we can do that. We can process them parallelly. That is another advantage they have. Again, if there is any error occur in ciphertext, the error will not propagate. Let's say through the communication channel, a sender is transmitting data to the receiver. Now during the communication, let's say some bits in C1 have changed. If that thing happen, it will not have any impact on C2 because they are processed separately. So this one is called error propagation. If because of C1 the processing of C2 would have some effect, this one we call error propagation. In this case, error propagation will not happen. So this is another advantage of using ECB mode. But it has several other disadvantages. First of all, since same key is utilized for all the blocks, that's why this is easier to break. As we can see here that only one key is used to encrypt in all the blocks and there is no other key involved or no other data involved. That's why this one is easier to break. Another notable disadvantage is identical plain text will create identical ciphertext. It means that, let's say, if P1 is equivalent to Pn, let's say, in that case, C1 also should be equivalent to Cn. So there are some similarity we can observe, and using those similarities by performing cryptanalysis, it is possible to break. Again, if we have identical plain text producing identical ciphertext, this kind of thing can happen. Look, so when ECB is applied, in that case, this kind of shape has been received. Over here, due to this one, identical plain text produce identical ciphertext will get something like this. Whereas our expectation is something like this. We need the things in such a way that no one can assume, no one can predict. Again, another problem remains here is that, remember we discussed in the class, according to Shannon, block cipher techniques should have two properties. One is confusion. The second one is diffusion. In case of diffusion, a single plain text would have impact on many ciphertext, which we are not achieving because we are processing each plain text separately. So these are the advantages and limitations of electronic codebook